When a tree falls, who pays for the damage if it crushes your car?
Smashed my windshield, got my hood, came down through my whole radiator system, got my suspension all messed up.
Why Wisconsin law is probably not on one man's side.
I don't think it's right. I think the city should cover what happens in their city park.
Plus,
he did very little work for us.
One contractor, dozens of criminal charges.
As far as I'm concerned, he defrauded and he's a deceit and a cheat.
The unfinished jobs that landed him in court, including one at a home steeped in Milwaukee history. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I am joined by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Contact 6 reporter, Jenna Sachs. Hi, Jenna.
Hi.
And we're all sitting at this little table again, like our big, long, fancy table is getting ready to go down to the RNC. Is that right? It's there. It's at the RNC.
It looks
okay.
great.
So you'll see that
Yep.
coming up soon in all of our coverage. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, July 3rd for release on Thursday, July 4th, Independence Day 2024. This episode has the title, Lessons in Liability. These stories have a little bit of a connection there. Jenna's going to talk about two Contact 6 reports, one involving damaged property, the other a damaged home. And in both cases, someone lost thousands of dollars and was left wondering, will anyone be held responsible? One of those men is somewhat satisfied today, and the other, well, he's decidedly not. We're going to talk about those stories right after the break.
Contact 6 is standing up for you, handling hundreds of disputes every year.
Whether it's $30 or more than $30,000,
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
is here to fight for your rights.
Getting answers,
The next day, I got a response.
getting results,
Within a matter of 48 hours, I had a decision.
making a difference.
I'm just grateful beyond words for the service that you provide.
Contact 6, because you matter. The FOX6 Investigators, Milwaukee's most experienced investigative team. Honored, trusted, respected.
Holding the powerful accountable by helping the powerless.
And exposing what you have a right to know.
The FOX6 Investigators.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Because you matter.
All right, so the first story we're going to talk about here is a man who writes to Contact 6 asking for help. He wanted the city of Fort Atkinson to pay for damage to his car. I feel this one a little bit because this happened to me camping.
You're right, it
just
did.
a couple of years ago. A tree fell on his car in a city park. First of all, Jenna, how did this happen?
So in April 27th, Luke Tabbert was driving through Root River Park in Fort Atkinson, and it's a really nice park. There's a pool there, there are football fields, there are trails for walking, and he was bringing his dog to the park to take a walk that day. And as he was driving through the park on the road, he heard like a crackling noise.
Got to about right here, I heard the crackle, and then all of a sudden, boom, the whole thing came down on me right here.
And he looked to his left and saw a tree split in half, and half of it fell right on his windshield.
He saw it falling as it was happening.
Well, he thought maybe there's a tree falling somewhere in the woods, but he didn't realize it was going to be so close to his car. So it was very scary. And it landed right there in front of him, branches, a foot from his face. And he had quite a bit of damage to his windshield, his radiator system, his suspension was messed up. And he went to the ER, checked himself in for whiplash. He was released, he's doing fine, but his car is not doing as well, and that's because he can't afford to make all of the repairs. When we met him, he was still driving around with a huge crack on his windshield. I'm sure it's obstructing the way he can see through it, and he said he's constantly worried that law enforcement is going to pull him over. So far, they've just been kind of giving him warnings, but he's wondering how long they're going to be lenient with him.
So this didn't happen at a friend's house where he could say, hey, friend, that thing just fell on my car. Like, what can we work out here? Yeah. Can you help me out? This was in a city-owned property.
So public park, right?
Public park,
Yes, public park.
Yes. So then what happened?
So he thought, well, maybe my insurance will cover it. So he called his insurance company, but Luke has something.
His own car insurance.
His own car insurance. So he called them and he was told, well, you have liability insurance, which only covers damage when he is at fault. So they don't have to cover this kind of damage. And he said, well, I suppose I could have had a more comprehensive plan, but I never thought this would happen to me. If he had had something more comprehensive, he probably would have gotten it covered. But his insurance company said, well, the next step is taking your claim to the city, file a claim with them, and see if they will cover your damages. But that wasn't the case.
I know that I mentioned something similar had happened to me, but I was in a different state. So I'm sure different laws applied, but I was at a campground, and it was a private campground, not a public park. A tree fell on my car in the campground, and I can empathize. It does a lot of damage. I thankfully had a comprehensive policy, but I didn't want my policy to have to cover that, because now my rates are going to go up in addition to the deductible I'm going to have to pay. But the campground said, we didn't know there was anything wrong with the tree. There was no advanced knowledge. And so they weren't responsible. Was that part of the case here? Does it matter whether or not the city knew that this tree was about to fall? What role does that play in this?
I think that does matter. So basically, Luke had this whole scenario play out when he contacted the city. He filed a claim, and then he got a letter back written on behalf of their insurance company. And it basically told him, hey, we investigated and we found no negligence or liability on behalf of Fort Atkinson. The city did not have prior notice that the tree in question would fail. So that's similar to what you mentioned. And it said the tree failed because of a weather event that could not be prevented. Now, Luke might disagree with that and say, hey, I bet that tree was already dead. But either way, the claim was denied. And the process is the decision goes to the Fort Atkinson Common Council, which upheld that decision by the insurance provider's company and said, we're going to disallow this claim. Luke was disappointed by that, but basically he has 6 months to file a lawsuit if he wants, if he could find a lawyer. That's the thing. He's been calling around, speaking with lawyers, and they don't want to touch this case. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One, it only involves a few $1,000s. And two, state statute and something called recreational immunity does not favor him or typically people in this kind of situation.
We've talked a lot about presidential immunity in the news, but this is recreational
I always
immunity,
learn something,
right?
and I'm like, recreational immunity? So, okay, we're going to talk to an expert in just a couple minutes, but can you kind of broadly explain what it is?
I'll give you a broad explanation, and then he can get more detailed
Cliff
later.
Notes.
Yeah, the Cliff Notes version. So state statute basically says recreational immunity limits property owners' liability during activities that could be on federal, state, and municipal land when people are recreating. So if they're going to have fun, to exercise, to relax, or just enjoy their time out. So it basically says a city park, for example, has no duty to inspect the property nor warn people of potentially dangerous hazards. And it basically protects the city so they don't have to accept liability for every piece of playground equipment or every tree when it's allowing the public to use this land for fun and for free. And it is meant to be applied broadly so cities aren't bogged down by lawsuits, which would make these parks more costly.
When you get hurt, I imagine you go, well, that doesn't make any sense. They should have taken better care of this or that. But I can imagine if you're someone or a government who says, we want to have, I think of last week's podcast, we talk about the city of Greenfield having a skate park. Imagine the risk of injury at a place like that.
Yeah.
If you said everyone who gets hurt at the skate park can sue the city, there would be absolutely no way the city could afford to hold skaters.
And credit to the city of Fort Atkinson. They did speak with me for this story. So we met with the city manager, Rebecca Hausman, and she told us, they are a tree city. They do have a plan in place for removing trees. And she told us the city did remove about 60 trees last year after there was a July storm, but this tree wasn't identified as dangerous during that time, so it wasn't marked. And she basically said this tree was in a wooded area. It was not brought to our attention. It's unfortunate, but they did follow procedure by going to their insurance company, having them do an investigation, and then they basically upheld that decision.
Now, okay, so maybe you don't know this answer. So if I was walking in the park 3 weeks prior to this incident, and I saw that maybe a tree was kind of looking not great, and I reached out to the city of Fort Atkinson, would they then go, all right, we'll take a look at it?
They do have a process for that. So if someone had filed a complaint about it, they would send someone down to look at it. They said they hadn't gotten any notice about this tree, but that might be a good question for our expert we're bringing in, because would that have been enough time to address the problem?
Right.
And would that be enough? to overcome.
Well, and I wonder, and this
immunity.
might also be a question for our guest, but you said he was going there to walk his dog. Does it matter why he was there? If it happens to be a thoroughfare that he has to pass through to get to some other business, and he's not there to recreate, does that matter? Because this statute covers recreational.
You gotta start writing down all these
activities.
questions.
So I have all kinds of questions, and I don't know, maybe it's a good idea for us to cut this conversation short and bring our expert in. What do you
I think he would just be so much better prepared to answer them. I have an idea, but I'm just going to let him.
Jenna,
do it.
we often say you're like you're the lawyer for people who can't afford lawyers.
Right, but we have a real lawyer.
We have a real lawyer who can answer some of this. So I think we are going to take a break, and when we come back, I know his name is Justin. What is our guest's name? Justin Wallace is going to be here to talk about recreational immunity in Wisconsin, how far it goes, and how it can get you in trouble in a situation like this, I suppose. We'll talk about that when we come right back.
Whether it's $30 or more than $30,000,
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
is here to fight for your rights.
Getting answers, getting results, making a difference. Contact 6 because you matter.
It's not just about telling a story.
It's about making positive change in our community
Holding the powerful accountable by helping the powerless.
and exposing what you have a right to know
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
because you matter.
Contact 6 is standing up for you, handling hundreds of disputes every year.
Whether it's $30 or more than $30,000,
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
is here to fight for your rights.
Getting answers, getting results, making a difference. Contact 6 because you matter.
All right, we are joined now by Justin Wallace of Wallace Law, like we said, a real lawyer, to talk about recreational immunity, which can protect cities, for example, when a tree falls on your car in a park and breaks the windshield and a lot of other things. Justin, thank you so much for joining us here on Open Record. We appreciate your time.
I appreciate you. And I will say, I greatly appreciated the discussion you guys just had about the important issues in recreational immunity. And you guys are touching on all of the right topics and all of the considerations that should come into play here. So I think that your intro was a great way to start leading into talking about some of the details of this statute.
So there's a million questions I could ask, but this seems like a pretty broad statute that applies to an awful lot. It appears to be an important one if you're going to be a municipality, for instance, that wants to have any kind of, you want to have, I don't know, you want to have parks, you want to have playgrounds and other things. But how broad is this? How big is this? How big are the protections that are afforded to governments by recreational immunity?
Yeah, so the protections are afforded to people who or entities that let people recreate on their property, regardless of whether they're municipal or not.
Okay, so not just
example that I
governments.
like to use for why this statute is in existence is, for example, if a snowmobile trail is trying to expand and needs to cross a farmer's field to reasonably connect two ends of the trail. And they go to the farmer and they say, hey, we want to put a snowmobile trail. It's just an easement. We'll take care of it and that sort of thing. And the farmer says, no way, somebody's going to sue me. Like there's no way I'm going to let you do that. And so in my mind, that's kind of the genesis of the recreational immunity concept, which is if you let somebody come onto your property and recreate, you're not earning a profit off of it. You are immune from three particular duties that oftentimes landowners will have. And those are duty to keep the property safe, the duty to inspect the premises, and the duty to warn people about potential hazards there. So those are really the three duties that landowners are forgiven under the recreational immunity statute. And it applies equally to municipalities. It applies to private landowners. It applies to encourage people to allow others to recreate on their property. You know, and it's, if you think about it conceptually, there is a little bit of a kind of a humanitarian vibe to it, where we want people in Wisconsin to recreate, and we want to encourage people who own land to allow them to do so on their property.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Justin, before the break, Sarah had asked about if someone had come to a park and noticed something ahead of time and reported it, would that be enough to overcome recreational immunity? Could someone who was affected by a tree that fell point to that and say, hey, the city knew and they didn't take care of it? How would that play into this?
Yeah, so generally speaking, that won't change the recreational immunity analysis. The standard, unless it rises the point of malicious, and that's actually what the law says, is that you can, if somebody was actually trying to hurt someone, then these immunities won't apply. So, being on notice of a dangerous tree probably doesn't rise to the level of maliciousness, but generally speaking, a recreational landowner does not have to inspect, warn, or maintain their property. And notice really isn't an aspect of it unless the notice rises to the level of, hey, you are basically, maliciously endangering people's lives by not following up on that.
So basic negligence. What about that?
Basic negligence is immunized by the statute, at least. And I want to be clear, as it relates to these three kind of concepts. If we're talking about the duty to keep the property safe, if we're talking about the duty to inspect the property, and if we're talking about the duty to warn people of dangers. And briefly, those three concepts are ways generally that folks will try to get around kind of immunity statutes. Like, for example, if somebody was walking in a park and somebody came out and attacked them, for example, and the city was talking about, we're immune from that sort of thing. It's like, well, that doesn't really fall within any of your, this wasn't about inspecting the property, maintaining the property, that sort of thing. So there are these three duties that are oftentimes used by people to kind of circumvent immunity statutes that are specifically called out here as inapplicable to people who are landowners who allow folks to recreate on their property.
Okay, so I think about this as a homeowner, and let's say I want to have friends over. We're going to go way back in time and say I want to have them over and like, you know what? We've got an old jart set. We're going to throw those metal tip jarts and we're going to stand on opposite ends when we do it. And hey, man, if something happens to you, I've got recreational immunity. It's fine. Does that actually apply? If somebody gets, stabbed in the heart with a jart at my house, am I okay?
So if you actually threw the dart that stabbed them, that wouldn't be a duty to keep the property safe, inspect, or to warn of an unsafe condition so much as an
Did I go too far? They're losing. They're losing it.
To my mind, frankly, is when we were all kids, one of my favorite things to do was to go to the local college and go to the high dive and jump off the high dive, for better or for worse, and whether I had the aptitude to do so or not. And there are activities, and lawn darts is a good example, that we can't do anymore. And in part, recreational immunities, in my mind, actually trying to get us some of those activities back, right? Like if there was a law out there saying that no swimming pool could ever be sued for somebody injuring themselves going off a high dive, you'd see kids going off the high dive. Whereas now you hear that it's an insurance issue and we're not going to open ourselves up to the liability. And so there's a balance here between allowing people to have fun and reasonably protecting folks from liability that they're trying to strike anyways in this recreational.
You heard it right here. Justin Wallace and I are saying bring back high dives and bring back jarts. That's no, all right, maybe not. Anyway.
So then, okay, if there wasn't recreational immunity, would that be just too costly of a venture then for places to have those public, the public pools, the public parks, and places where people recreate?
Yeah, and also changes the cost benefit analysis too. Will city be able to build a swimming pool if they have to account for the fact that they will probably get 2 or 3 claims a year that total X that we'll have to pay for? And so, it almost goes upstream to those fundamental decisions as to, can we do this? And we can only do this if we're going to be immune from some level of liability for constructing them.
Now, let me ask you how far recreational activity goes, because how do you define what that is? It seems like you could, if you're a property owner, you could really try to stretch the definition to protect yourself when something goes wrong.
They list a lot of recreational activities. There's actually one case in Wisconsin where a person, it was an elementary student who was sledding at recess, and they actually found that wasn't a recreational activity because the person was forced to be in school and recess was mandatory. So the idea is that somebody's actually voluntarily recreating themselves somewhere. And the statute provides a number of examples, like animal training, ballooning, bicycling, bird watching, camping, fishing, hang gliding, hiking, horseback riding, hunting, picnicking, rock climbing, sightseeing, that sort of thing. So it's things that people are voluntarily recreating at no cost to. If somebody's making more than about $2,000 a year off people recreating, these immunities go away. They're not designed to regulate kind of for-profit recreational entities. They're designed to regulate the situation where somebody is voluntarily letting folks have fun on their property.
Okay, that was my next question because I was going to ask Justin, does it make a difference if people are paying an entry fee? For example, we see all these different events that pop up at our public parks in the summer. Would that maybe be a hurdle for recreational immunity?
Yeah, and so there was a case where a recreational softball league, for example, was sued because a foul ball clocked somebody in the head in the parking lot. And the analysis there was actually that because there was an entry fee and the city was the sponsor of the league, that it was more of a for-profit venture as opposed to simply allowing the people to recreate. And so, yes, this statute is not meant to immunize you from liability when you're taking people's money in exchange for a service.
If I read that case, I was reading about that, read it correctly, it sounds like the city in that case tried to go one step further and say, well, the person in the parking lot wasn't there to watch the game. They were just walking in the park. So it's not part of the sponsored activity. That didn't fly, right?
I don't think so, no.
Now, I want to go back to something that when I was, this is way back in my early days here at FOX6 News, we covered a story that the real focus of the story became, is cheerleading a sport? And that became the focus of a case that went before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. There were oral arguments all about whether or not cheerleading is a sport. And it got people up in arms who were defensive of, well, of course cheerleaders are athletic. And have you seen them jump up in the air and fly? But the reason it mattered is because cheerleading, we haven't talked about this yet, but there's a team sports exception, I believe, as well, correct? That recreational immunity does not apply, or maybe it does apply in team sports. Tell me a little bit about that.
If I'm being honest with you, I've seen that cheerleading case, but I'm not all that familiar with it off the top of my head. The recreational immunity concepts, though, generally don't apply to ideas like team sports, in my opinion. That's more of a sanctioned activity that's being done in a particular place, as opposed to somebody making the decision to enter property to recreate.
So totally different.
So I think that I'm sure that the Supreme Court had to carefully consider that sort of thing, and I'm sure that's a kind of an awkward fit for this statute, because in my mind, if somebody gets hurt during a kind of cheerleading sponsored event, and the negligence questions are a little bit different from, does the property owner have immunity from recreation? But so I think that, and if you look at the statute, all of the things that are listed are generally like individual or maybe couples or family kind of things, as opposed to traditional team sports activities.
Going back to Jenna's story, would it have mattered if the gentleman whose car was hit by the tree happened to just be passing through on his way to the dry cleaners, as opposed to going there to take his dog for a walk? Would that have made a difference?
If he was on the property for any form of recreating, it doesn't. And, you know, your point's an interesting one, which is, you know, if somebody's simply taking a direct line through a park for the purposes of business, like, does that really fall within the recreational immunity statute? And I suspect it would. I don't know that we're going to get into why the decision was made to walk across the park, other than it was made open to an individual for that purpose. And, you know, the alternative is they can just close the road, right? They can close. And then I'm sure that's some of the city's position here is, well, we'll just close the whole thing down. Like, we'll you know,
and that's what takes away
both the person who's recreating and the person who is passing through for business.
Justin, I have another scenario for you, because you mentioned private property owners. And I think about, you know, it's summertime. There are a lot of neighborhood kids who are just kind of ending up in my yard playing all the time. Am I liable in any case for what happens there? Or would I be would this apply to me as someone who has kids just recreating in my yard?
It could, if the theory is that you didn't inspect or maintain your property the way you should have.
Got it.
I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. That being said, we all know, you know, I think in the last 10 or 15 years, the trampoline in the backyard has kind of come out of vogue, and we need to build fences around our swimming pools because, you know, the best prevention is the best success here, right? You don't want any kids to get hurt on your property regardless. And if you can get if you're fighting about immunity from liability for the death of a child, you probably already lost.
Right.
The test in court is, did you say get off my lawn? No, I don't think that's it. Well, Justin, we really appreciate you coming by and helping us get some better understanding of this. In the end, it sounds like the gentleman who had the tree fall on his car is kind of out of luck here, yeah?
That's my thought, and I empathize with him for the difficulty to find a lawyer who will represent him there. And the note about the first party auto insurance, I think, is a good reason for everybody out there to just make sure you have collision and comprehensive on your policy. That is by far the easiest way to resolve general car damage issues, as opposed to trying to find some liability on some other party.
Well, Justin Wallace of Wallace Law, thank you so much for being here on Open Record. We'll let you get on with your day. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, a man wrote to Contact 6 asking for help. He wanted the city of Fort Atkins. No, I'm sorry. That's the one we just talked about. Hey, let me go to the other one. I was on the wrong page, guys.
Sorry, guys.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so the story we're going to be talking about next is instead, this is... Jenna, tell me, where do I've lost my train of thought. There it is. It's a home improvement. Sometimes this stuff happens. A Milwaukee home improvement contractor facing dozens of criminal charges. A handful of them are for unfinished work at a house that once belonged to one of Milwaukee's most illustrious men. Jenna Sachs, we're going to talk about that story when we come right back.
Handling hundreds of disputes every year. Contact 6, because you matter. Fox 6 investigators, demanding the answers you deserve, because you matter. Contact 6, making things right for you. If you have a problem, see if we can help. Go to fox6now.com or call 414-586-2666.
So a home improvement contractor is facing dozens of criminal charges, some of them felonies, for unfinished work at a house that belonged to one of Milwaukee's most illustrious men. Jenna Sachs, who did this house belong to, and how did it get wrapped up in all of this?
So this house is in the Washington Heights neighborhood, which is on the west side of the city, like north of American Family Field in the Menominee Valley.
Very familiar,
It's
yes.
a very cool neighborhood with a lot of historic looking homes in it. And one of them is on Washington Boulevard, and it's known as the William S. Harley Mansion. And that is because the co-founder of the Harley-Davidson Motor Company, William S. Harley, lived in that house about 100 years ago, and he was followed by a couple generations of his family. And it's a very cool house when you go inside. A lot of it is original, like wood paneling, wood floors, like heavy doors, button light switches, lots of cool features and arched windows. And it's you feel like you're stepping into history when you step into this house. It's actually on the National Register of Historic Places, and that's part of the reason the Mathis family was interested in buying it in 2021. And when Jeff and Katie bought it, it was kind of in rough shape. A lot of it had fallen into disrepair, and they bought it with the intention of renovating and restoring a lot of this house. So they moved in and they started looking for contractors, and that's how they found Nathan Noble Regina and hired him to do quite a bit of work at the house.
So they hire him and they come up with the plan and they probably write up a contract. And then what happens?
Right. So I met Jeff and Katie at the Milwaukee County Courthouse where Regina was appearing on a number of criminal charges.
Things haven't gone well.
Yes.
Good.
We met them at a court appearance for this contractor, and I talked to them a bit about their story. And so basically they found Regina on Angie's List, and they hired him to remodel the kitchen, to tear out a back staircase. This house had 2 staircases, and to install a main room laundry. And so they came to an agreement with him. They liked him. They paid him a down payment of $11,000+. And they say in the end, he really only did about 5% of the work he promised to do. And what he did is he came in and he gutted the main floor. He gutted the kitchen, that staircase, and then he didn't come back. So they were left in this situation where there were hazards around the house and dust and exposed walls and ceilings, and they lived like that for several months.
Do they have any idea why he stopped showing up, or did he just stop responding to messages?
It sounds like communication just became really difficult. And after months of living like this, they decided we're not going to do it anymore. They canceled their contract, and they said he did promise them a refund and put it in writing, and they still didn't receive one.
I know that having covered these things for so many years, you know that contractor issues, it's not necessarily, it's a high bar to get to criminal charges.
Mm-hmm.
So how did this one end up in a case where there are felony charges? Is it a matter of the amount of money that was involved here, or is it the fact that this was not just this particular family that dealt with these problems.
Well, it wasn't just this particular family, but I do know this was assisted by the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. They had been taking complaints and investigating this as well, and they do refer cases to District Attorney's Office. So it sounds like they were doing quite a bit of investigating as well. From
On
the people
Regina, right?
On Regina,
Okay,
from
yeah.
a number of different clients that we've spoken with. So yes, it can be hard to get theft by contractor charges actually filed because sometimes DAs are really busy with violent crimes and they can't do this. They say, could you take that to small claims court instead? But other times they do actually file charges. And in this case, there were a lot filed, 45.
What kind of things?
So there were 9 counts of theft by contractor. 6 of those were felonies, 3 of those misdemeanors. And then there were 36 misdemeanor contract violations. Those are things for like illegal contracts and not providing lien waiver notices. And that can add up to quite a bit of fallout for this guy. He could face prison time. He could face time in the county jail as well. And some people are happy to see this happen, like the Mathis family, who was left with this hazardous house and a toddler. They had 3 kids in their house, including a little kid, and there was a drop off from their kitchen down into the basement where that staircase was partially torn out. They were very worried someone would just fall over the edge onto that concrete basement. So they had to live in a very difficult situation for a while. And I know that they tried to work things out in civil court. They were actually filed a case against him, and he was ordered to pay them $24,000, and he did not.
So they went the civil route first, because my thought is that's the first thing you would hear is this is a civil matter. Go deal with it in civil court. You have a remedy there. They did that. They got the judgment. They still didn't get paid. And then oftentimes you'll hear maybe there's someone who's kind of engaged in this. They've gotten, I think of some of the stories you've done on like window companies where they get way behind and then they can't catch up and then it just becomes a mess. And then they file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And you go, well, I'm never going to get my money back. That's the end of that. How does it elevate from this whole civil, then maybe bankruptcy, into something that becomes criminal? Is it literally just a DA's, a prosecutor's discretion to say this one's egregious enough that we're going to file charges?
You know, maybe sometimes. I do know it has to do with the amount of money. Like the severity of the charge depends on partly the amount of money. Like the felonies are for thefts greater than $2,500 to $5,000. So they classify that by the amount of money lost, and misdemeanors are maybe for less money that is taken. So I know that factors into a little, but actually he is facing possible prison time. Those theft by contractor felonies, they could result in fines or up to 3.5 years in prison for each charge. And the theft by contractor misdemeanors could result up to 9 months in prison. And those misdemeanor contract violations could result, I think it's up to 9 months or up to a year in the county jail. So whether he makes a plea here or whether he decides to fight everything, right now he's pleaded not guilty to everything. So we'll see how this plays out. He waived his right to a preliminary hearing, so it's possible this is going to trial, and he might try to fight all of it.
Did the Mathis family, like, what's the status of the house? Did they end up finding another contractor?
So,
I mean, I assume they're out that $11,000 or whatever that they,
Right. So they are out that money. They were able to find a couple other contractors who came in and finished the job, but they said they lived roughly like that for about a year as a result of all this, which, I mean, nobody likes. It's like taking the worst part of a construction project when everything's torn out and living like that for a year. You could even say the 2 other people we reported on in 2022, when we reported on Regina the first time, they maybe weren't as inconvenienced aside from the money side of things because they paid him for projects that never started, period. So we interviewed a woman named Julie Aguilar who hired him to do an attic renovation project. She wanted to make it into like an office for herself. And he took the money and did not do any work. And we interviewed a guy named Philip Ufnowski. He had an outdoor support pillar that had been attacked by carpenter ants. And so he paid him $630-something and work never started. So this seemed pretty cut and dry, especially when you have contracts to back up documentation that shows, hey, you did not do what the contract said you would do.
So when the Mathis family hired him to do the work at the Harley house, were there already red flags out there? I mean, could they have avoided this had they done a little more homework?
I don't know what was out at the time, because you have to remember that was in 2021. So early 2022. So his business was only around for like a year and a half before it was dissolved. So I don't know if there was a ton out there at this point. There is now. If you go into CCAP, there are small claims cases filed against him. There are the criminal charges. But at the time, I don't think there was as much out there on
I was
him.
just wondering if there was any sort of, is there a lesson here for consumers in dealing with contractors and not getting stuck in a spot like
Well,
this?
I do hesitate when I hear about people using these online lists. I don't think those are as vetted as people think they are. So if you go to a website, maybe you're familiar with the name where you can find contractors. That doesn't mean the website has necessarily investigated these people. And you should obviously do your homework, meet them, maybe ask for references, people you could speak to about past work. And then, I always recommend BBB. And to be honest, if it were me hiring someone for a job that was $11,000+ I think I would want to make sure they had more of a history, maybe not a new business. I don't want to go against everybody trying to launch a business, but when it's a lot of money and extra protection is if someone's been in business longer than that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think maybe that's a good time for us to go off the record. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come right back, we will go off the record.
Honored, trusted, respected. The FOX6 Investigators.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Because you matter.
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6
is here to fight for your rights.
Contact 6, because you matter. FOX6 Investigators, demanding the answers you deserve, because you matter.
And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have not prepared, but of course, Open Records executive producer Sarah Smith has prepared because she created the question or questions. It looks like a list. No.
This is my running list that I.
I shouldn't look because I'll get sneak peeks
that's
of
okay.
Future episodes.
Okay, I'm glad we have a little bit of time to, not a little bit, a lot, but like enough, because we're talking about leftovers.
Oh,
so
is this the one?
Yes,
I
so
suggested. I do know this
so
one.
Brian talked about this. We talked about it in his office a couple weeks ago. He's like,
could
"Hey,
be controversial.
Got a really good question for off the record." So, when it comes to leftovers in your house, you have the leftovers in a container, and then as you eat them throughout the day, throughout the week, whatever, it becomes less the volume in the container. Do you condense them into a smaller container, or do you just leave the big container with just a little bit of food, which may be taking up a lot of extra space in your refrigerator? That's step one. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think it depends on how busy I am, right? So I usually have a moment like when the fridge starts to get really full of Tupperware and I'm doing a load of dishes, maybe it's been a couple of weeks, and then I consolidate everything. But if I'm in a rush and like everybody's running around, I might put like that one little bit of cheese. Yeah. I might just keep it in that container. So sometimes that happens. So I think it depends on how crazy my house is at that moment.
At the beginning of a good week, like on a Sunday, we will chop a lot of vegetables and other things to prepare for the week.
Yes.
But then as the week goes on, you have a lot of larger containers that contain a small amount of food.
Sure.
And the refrigerator is packed. And I'm like, why is this giant container in here for that little bit of, I don't know, whatever it was, some cucumbers that are left. And so then I'm always consolidating, but then I'm taking the big containers and sticking them in the sink and they're all piling up. And we have extra dishes to do.
Yep.
But I just feel like I can't leave that little bit of food in the big container.
Yeah, there's something there's something about it that where there's all this extra space in the container. I'm like, I feel like I want the leftovers to look nice. I want them to feel respected.
I don't know if this is also a psychological thing. If I see a little bit of food in a giant container, I feel like that food's no good. Yeah, but if I see a little bit of food in a right-sized container, it feels like it's perfectly appropriate.
And
to
I go,
eat.
who left this much? Which really, it might be a serving.
Sure.
But comparatively to in that large container.
I feel like I have a lot of habits that would annoy you guys. Like I'm starting, that's my open record trend. I'm always like, oh, another thing that I'm doing that would probably drive someone crazy. Cool.
No, but maybe that's why we would get along so well.
I'm sure I drive my wife crazy because I'm throwing a bunch of extra dishes in the sink that didn't need to be there because that container was
it's not
going
to drive her crazy if you do the dishes.
Well, that's a good point.
As long as I have room in my refrigerator, I might keep it there.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes,
my husband's the same way, but that's why it all works, right?
Because I always have dishes in my sink. Like even when I load the dishwasher, sometimes there's dishes left over, and I just don't. I would rather have them closed off in my fridge than piled up in my sink.
I do a lot of dishes, mostly because I love the feeling of the moment when both sides of the sink are empty.
I cannot leave dishes in
there. And literally, the moment I finish, my stepson will walk in and put down a bowl and whatever knife and fork, and I'm like, come on.
just had it done. Okay.
Yeah.
What about the length of time, the duration that you eat the leftovers? So you make a dish. You make a dish on Monday night. So Tuesday, probably still good. And I'm not saying that it's bad because like, oh, it's been sitting. I mean, there's definitely a point where there's like, you shouldn't eat the leftovers anymore. But what about like, I cannot eat this dish a third or fourth or whatever night?
I mean, if it's like chicken, I'll eat that for a week or like something like that. I don't know, like a salad, I'm not going to eat that again. I will not eat a salad the next day.
No,
or like a fully prepared salad.
Right. Or even certain vegetables, if you don't cook them up. I don't know. There's certain things I won't eat again. I'm pretty bad about eating leftovers. I'll eat them for a couple of days. My dad is great because he comes to town and he takes every leftover and he eats them. The salad could be limp and like 5 days old.
My husband too, and he's like, well, I can't waste this. He will eat every drop of leftovers and then get so mad at me where he's like, you're not going to eat this anymore? And I was like, no.
Right.
See, I told you we chop vegetables, but like cucumbers in particular, you get like the first, like Monday and Tuesday, absolutely. Yeah. Wednesday, I better get those soon. You get to Thursday,
the
maybe
cukes
Friday,
are a little soft.
When you see they're kind of just that squishy, and you go,
peppers look so sad.
They do.
I don't think I can. Yeah, I don't know if I can anymore. But then I feel bad because there's still a bunch in there. Maybe I got busy. I didn't eat enough of them, and I don't want to throw them out. So the one thing sometimes I will do, I don't know if this is really true, but I feel like if maybe I put them in an omelet, they're cooked. And
I do that all the time.
No, that's fair.
So,
That's not crazy. Lindsay, are you a leftover eater?
So my husband will like slice up cucumbers for me for work. And a lot of times I'll throw them away whenever I get to work. because
does like, Mr. Lindsay listen to the podcast?
No, he does not. After he slices them up, they dry out in the container.
They do get that.
So I'm like thinking maybe I should put like a wet paper towel. But we don't use paper towels. So like it's a spiral. But I mean.
So wait a minute. So is that true? Like if I left them in cucumber form and just cut them each day, they would be fresher and better.
Yes, because that's if I cut from a cucumber and wrap the end, I always really slice the thin slice because otherwise it's all like that weird.
That end is gummy
like
and
dry.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true.
Oh, okay. That's. Those poor cucumbers.
But you mentioned chicken breasts. I don't know if there's a certain number. No, I don't know if there's a certain number of days that are safe because I'll make a bunch of, I'll make a bunch in say the Instant Pot or something like that, and then have them for the week.
But not the air fryer.
Sometimes that too.
Okay.
But
Just
whatever
checking.
it is, I was trying not to say air fryer on one episode, but there we go.
Sorry.
So, but then how many days out can you continue to eat those before you go, I don't know, is this the chicken?
3 days. 3 days max.
3 days?
Really?
Yeah, leftovers are 3 days max.
Okay.
Oh,
all
okay.
right.
Yeah.
Lindsay's rules
It's 3 days.
for
husband,
kitchen
you heard
health.
it here.
Kitchen
3
health.
And I don't eat meat, but
that's okay. But that's it.
I think it depends on the food, but also how much I like it.
Yeah.
So like my mom has like leftovers sometimes, like different pasta dishes and stuff, and I'll eat that for days and days if it's still there. It won't taste quite as good.
Yeah.
But like it depends on that. But like old potatoes, like baked potatoes, you can eat those for days and days too. Old potatoes.
I do like having
potatoes today.
I do like having leftovers though, because there's those nights you're like, I am not gonna make another meal, and I just like having something that I can make that's quick.
Yeah, but then I have like cereal.
Do you see? My wife does that too. I can't do like cereal for dinner. I've never been. I know. Do you judge me? It's
I'm
fine.
not judging. I'm just
I can't do it.
Wow.
I don't know.
Okay, wait. So when you have the leftover chicken, do you prepare it in a way the first time that it has like some sort of sauce? Chicken, I find I eat it, but it's so dry.
I eat a lot of marinated,
I
marinated meats.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those I feel like are pretty good. I wouldn't ever eat fish or anything like that.
Oh, see, I
If
like
it does-
it.
that's
I'm
the
the
thing.
person that reheats the fish.
Yeah,
I like it.
If you get later in the week with the chicken, it does get dry, and that's when I'll make sure I have some sort of a sauce.
Douse
or
it in
something to
ranch?
dip it in something. Yeah, right. Something to dip it in that makes it a little
All
more
right,
palatable.
that's
All
fair.
right. Well, I think that was a good one. That was a very good talker.
It was very good, Brian. Thank you for that suggestion. I did a very good job.
We're going to take a break and get to the leftovers of this podcast when we come right back.
The FOX6 Investigators, Milwaukee's most experienced investigative team. Honored, trusted, respected.
It's not just about telling a story.
It's about making positive change in our community.
Holding the powerful accountable.
You're just a piece of
by helping the powerless.
And exposing what you have a right to know.
Not really sure why no one wants to talk about it.
The FOX6 Investigators.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Because you matter.
Contact 6 is standing up for you, handling hundreds of disputes every year.
Whether it's It's $30 or more than $30,000.
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6
is here to fight for your rights.
Getting answers.
The next day, I got a response.
Getting results.
Within a matter of 48 hours, I had a decision.
Making a difference.
I'm just grateful beyond words for the service that you provide.
Contact 6, because you matter.
Yeah, maybe you can only listen to this podcast for 3 days, and then after that, it's no good anymore. You got to get ready for next week. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. Obviously, ladies, thank you very much. Sarah, Jenna, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yes, you're welcome.
And as always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including our executive producer, Sarah Smith, our editor, Dave Machuda, our chief photographer, who usually mans the video switcher, Kale Zimney. He is not here. Instead, it is Lindsay managing the video switcher and letting us all know 3 days for leftovers. With that, I'm Bryan Polcyn. We'll be back next week.